My name is Amber, and at 32 years old, I still felt like a disappointing child whenever my father Richard entered the room. His retirement dinner loomed ahead of me like a dark cloud, promising the usual mixture of subtle jabs and overt dismissals. I had no idea that night would change everything between us. I had spent my entire life trying to prove myself to a man who seemed incapable of being proud of me, but my husband Ethan was about to reveal a truth even I didn't know. Before I tell you how my father's retirement dinner became the night that changed everything, drop a comment letting me know if you've ever had to confront a difficult family member, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories. Growing up as Richard Miller's daughter meant living under the shadow of perfection. My father wasn't just successful, he was exceptional. As the chief operations officer at TechSphere Solutions, he had transformed a struggling tech company into a market leader through sheer force of will and brilliant strategic decisions. His colleagues revered him, competitors feared him, and his family, well, we lived with the impossible standards he set. From my earliest memories, nothing I did was ever quite good enough. My kindergarten finger painting was messy. My perfect spelling tests in elementary school were met with "that's what you're supposed to do." When I brought home straight A's in middle school, his response was always, "Where's the extra credit?" It wasn't that he was cruel or abusive in the traditional sense. He provided well for us financially and never raised a hand in anger, but his emotional coldness and impossible standards left deep wounds that no amount of material comfort could heal. The contrast between how he treated me and my brother Michael couldn't have been more stark. 3 years older than me, Michael struggled academically but excelled at soccer. A C on Michael's report card would earn a clap on the shoulder and a "good job, son." I know math isn't your thing. Meanwhile, my A in physics prompted a lecture about applying myself and living up to my potential. My mother Diane witnessed it all with a pained smile. In private, she would comfort me, saying things like, "Your father just has high expectations because he knows how smart you are, or he doesn't mean to be so hard on you," but she never confronted him directly about his unequal treatment. In her generation, wives didn't challenge their husbands, especially successful ones who provided so well. Her silence felt like complicity, though I understood her position better as I grew older. Family gatherings were performances where I desperately tried to earn my father's approval. Thanksgiving dinners featured detailed accounts of Michael's latest soccer tournament, while my academic achievements warranted barely a nod. Christmas mornings included expensive gifts that demonstrated how little my father actually knew about my interests or passions. My 16th birthday party was scheduled around my father's business trip, then rescheduled, then ultimately celebrated 2 weeks late with a generic cake and a gift card. The memory that still stings most happened at my high school graduation. As valedictorian, I delivered a speech that received a standing ovation from the audience. Teachers approached me afterward with tears in their eyes, saying it was the most meaningful valedictorian address they'd heard in decades. My father's comment, "Your posture could have been better and you said twice." 3 weeks later, when Michael graduated with a C average, my father took the entire family out to a 5-star restaurant and toasted the next great Miller man. Despite everything, I was determined to forge my own path. I chose to become a pediatric occupational therapist, finding deep fulfillment in helping children with disabilities develop the skills to navigate their world more confidently. The first time I helped a 5-year-old with severe motor challenges feed herself independently, I felt a purpose so profound that my father's approval seemed momentarily insignificant. Richard, of course, saw it differently. "Playing with kids all day, with your intelligence, such a waste of potential," he said when I told him my career choice. "You could have been a surgeon or a corporate lawyer, something that actually makes a difference." He never understood that I was making a difference, just not in the high-status, high-income way he valued. Everything changed when I met Ethan Chen at a charity fundraiser for the Children's Hospital where I worked. Tall, with kind eyes behind stylish glasses, Ethan was a successful software engineer who specialized in creating accessible technology. Our conversation flowed effortlessly from the challenges faced by children with disabilities to the latest advances in adaptive technology. And by the end of the night, I knew I had met someone special. Ethan saw through my father from their first meeting. After an uncomfortable dinner where Richard spent the entire time grilling Ethan about his income and career prospects while dismissing my professional contributions to the conversation, Ethan took my hand as we walked to the car and simply said, "He has no idea what an extraordinary woman you are. That's his loss." In that moment, I felt truly seen for perhaps the first time in my life. We married a year later, with Richard giving a perfunctory toast that focused more on welcoming Ethan to a family of achievers than celebrating our love. but with Ethan by my side, my father's slights became easier to bear. We built a life filled with mutual respect, shared purpose, and genuine affection, all the things I had craved from my family of origin. So when the embossed invitation to Richard's retirement dinner arrived in our mailbox, my first instinct was to decline. 32 years of disappointment had taught me to protect myself, but Ethan surprised me by suggesting we attend. "I think this is one dinner you won't want to miss," he said with an enigmatic smile that both confused and intrigued me. "Are you sure we should go?" I asked Ethan as we drove home from work a week before the retirement dinner. The invitation had been sitting on our kitchen counter for days, neither accepted nor declined, like Schrodinger's social obligation. Traffic crawled along the highway as the setting sun painted the sky in hues of orange and pink. Ethan kept his eyes on the road, but I could see the thoughtful expression on his face as he considered his response. "I think you should," he said finally, "not for him but for you. Closure matters, Amber, but whatever you decide, I'm with you 100%. I sighed, watching the cars around us. "You've always been better at these things than me. The first time you met him, you handled his interrogation like a pro. I was so impressed." Ethan laughed, the sound warm and comforting in the confines of our car. "Oh, I was terrified. Your father has this way of looking at people like they're specimens under a microscope." "Tell me about it," I muttered. But I remember thinking that night, this man has the most amazing daughter and he doesn't even realize it. I could tell from the way you tensed up every time he spoke that his approval meant everything to you, and I hated that he had that power over someone as brilliant as you. The memory of that first dinner was still vivid in my mind. It was 3 months after Ethan and I started dating, and I had been a bundle of nerves introducing him to my parents. Richard had spent the entire evening questioning Ethan about his career trajectory, investment strategy, and 5-year plan, barely acknowledging my presence except to point out how Ethan's success in tech must be nice for Amber since her field isn't known for financial rewards. "Dr. Caldwell says I've made good progress," I said, referring to my therapist of 2 years. Weekly sessions with her had helped me understand the dynamics of my relationship with my father and develop healthier responses to his criticism. "She thinks attending might be a good opportunity to practice some of the boundary-setting techniques we've been working on." "Dr. Caldwell is very wise," Ethan agreed, "and I have a feeling this particular dinner might surprise you." I glanced at him suspiciously. "What does that mean?" His smile was innocent, too innocent, just that retirement can change people. "Maybe your dad will be more relaxed now that the pressure of work is off." I didn't believe that for a second, but I let it drop as we pulled into our driveway. The next day found me at Nordstrom, searching for the perfect outfit for the dinner, something my father couldn't criticize. Professional but not stuffy, stylish but not flashy, feminine but not frivolous. After 2 hours and a mild headache, I settled on a navy blue sheath dress with a subtle peplum detail and matching blazer. Conservative enough for Richard's approval, but stylish enough that I wouldn't feel like I was wearing a costume. "You don't need to try so hard," the saleswoman said kindly as I scrutinized my reflection for the dozenth time. "You look beautiful." If only it were that simple, I thought, but thanked her anyway. That evening my mother called to confirm our attendance. "I'm so glad you're coming, sweetheart," she said, her voice carrying its usual blend of warmth and anxiety. "Your father has something special planned, and it wouldn't be the same without you there." My stomach tightened. "Special planned? What does that mean?" "Oh, I don't know the details," she said quickly. "You know your father keeps things close to the vest, but he specifically asked if you were coming, so that's something, right?" The hopefulness in her voice made my heart ache. After all these years, she was still trying to build bridges between Richard and me, still believing that somewhere deep down he wanted a real relationship with his daughter. "We'll be there, Mom," I promised, more for her sake than anything else. After we hung up, I found Ethan in his home office, surrounded by multiple computer screens. He quickly minimized whatever he was looking at when I entered. "Everything okay?" I asked, leaning against the doorframe. "Just some research," he said vaguely. "How's your mom?" "The same. Apparently, my father has something special planned for the dinner." "Is that right?" Ethan's tone was just a little too casual. I narrowed my eyes. "Ethan, what's going on? You've been acting strange ever since the invitation arrived, and now you're being secretive about whatever you're working on." He swiveled his chair to face me fully. "I promise I'll explain everything soon. Just trust me when I say I think attending this dinner is important, but if you really don't want to go, we won't. Your well-being comes first." His sincerity was impossible to doubt, even if his mysterious behavior left me confused. "I trust you," I said finally, "but you're being very weird." His smile was both apologetic and excited, Like someone keeping a surprise birthday party secret. Noted, how about pizza for dinner? I'm starving. And just like that, the subject was changed. The morning of the retirement dinner, I woke up with my heart racing and my thoughts scattered. The prospect of spending an entire evening being subtly belittled by my father while he was celebrated by everyone else felt overwhelming. I lay in bed, trying to control my breathing as Ethan slept peacefully beside me. When the anxiety attack hit full force, I slipped out of bed and into the bathroom, closing the door before letting the tears come. I sat on the edge of the bathtub, hugging myself as wave after wave of panic washed over me. I was 32 years old, a successful professional with a loving marriage and friends who valued me. Why did the thought of disappointing my father still have this power? The door opened gently and Ethan knelt in front of me, still in his pajamas, his hair tousled from sleep. Without a word, he took my hands in his. In through the nose, out through the mouth, he coached softly. That's it, I'm right here with you. We breathed together until the worst of the panic subsided. I'm sorry, I whispered. Never apologize for how you feel, he said firmly, especially not to me. He brushed a tear from my cheek. If you want to call and cancel right now, I'll do it for you. I shook my head. No, I need to do this. I keep hoping that someday something will change, that if he'll see me, really see me. Ethan's expression was complicated sympathy mixed with something that looked almost like anticipation. Today might be more significant than you think, he said cryptically. I was too emotionally drained to question him further. The drive to Le Chateau, the most exclusive restaurant in the city, was mostly silent. I mentally rehearsed what I would say to my father, preparing responses to his inevitable criticisms. Ethan reached over occasionally to squeeze my hand, his touch a lifeline to sanity as we pulled up to the valet stand. Remember, Ethan said as we walked toward the entrance, no matter what happens in there, you're remarkable, and I love you exactly as you are. I squeezed his hand in silent gratitude as we pushed through the heavy oak doors into the restaurant and toward whatever my father had planned. Le Chateau exuded old-world luxury, with its crystal chandeliers, mahogany paneling, and hushed, reverent atmosphere. A hostess in a tailored black dress led us through the main dining room to a private event space in the back, where about 30 people were already gathered, cocktails in hand, engaged in animated conversation. My father stood in the center of the room, commanding attention as effortlessly as always. At 65, Richard Miller remained an imposing figure, tall and broad-shouldered, with silver hair that made him look distinguished rather than old. His bespoke suit probably cost more than I made in a month, and his confident stance spoke of a man accustomed to being the most important person in any room. He was holding court with a group of men in similar expensive suits, all laughing at something he'd just said. My mother hovered nearby, elegant in a conservative black dress, her smile fixed and slightly anxious as she monitored the gathering with the practiced eye of a corporate wife. She spotted us first, relief washing over her face as she hurried over. Amber, Ethan, I'm so glad you made it. She embraced me briefly. Then Ethan, Richard was just asking when you'd arrive. That seemed unlikely, but I nodded and allowed her to guide us toward my father. As we approached, Richard glanced up, his expression revealing nothing as he excused himself from his colleagues. Amber, Ethan, he nodded at each of us in turn. His eye scanned my carefully chosen outfit and I saw the slight tightening around his mouth that indicated disapproval. You could have worn something more professional. This is an important industry event, not just a family dinner. And there it was, not even a full minute in his presence, and already I felt 2 inches tall. I opened my mouth to defend my perfectly appropriate attire, but Ethan stepped in smoothly. Richard, great to see you. Congratulations on your retirement. The company's stock is going to miss your leadership. He extended his hand, and my father had no choice but to shake it. Yes, well, tech spheres in capable hands moving forward, Richard replied, some of his gruffness fading as the conversation turned to business. Let me introduce you to some colleagues. Over the next 20 minutes, Richard introduced us to what felt like everyone in the room except, I noticed, he introduced Ethan by name and profession every time. While I was simply my daughter, several of his colleagues seemed surprised to learn Richard had a daughter at all, which was telling. One silver-haired board member actually said, "A daughter? I thought Michael was your only child, Richard." My father's laugh was dismissive. Amber keeps a lower profile than her brother. Lower profile, as if I had chosen invisibility rather than being rendered invisible by his indifference. Speaking of Michael, he arrived fashionably late with his wife Jessica, immediately becoming the center of attention as Richard proudly introduced his son, the regional sales director for a luxury car brand. The fact that Michael had landed the job through my father's connections went unmentioned. "There's my boy," Richard exclaimed, clapping Michael on the shoulder, always making an entrance. "Jessica, you look lovely as always." Michael, who resembled our father with his tall frame and confident bearing, beamed under the praise. He gave me a quick, distracted hug before being pulled into conversation with my father's colleagues. Across the room, I noticed a man about my age watching our family interaction with an unreadable expression. He was sharply dressed in a modern suit that set him apart from the more traditional attire of my father's older colleagues. When he caught me looking, he offered a slight smile and nod. "That's James Westfield," my mother murmured, following my gaze. "Your father's protege. He's taking over Richard's position." Before I could respond, a server appeared to announce that dinner was being served. We moved to the elegantly set long table, where place guards directed the seating arrangement. Predictably, Ethan and I were far from the center of the table where my father sat, flanked by Michael and James, with board members and senior executives filling the adjacent seats. The first course arrived, a delicate seafood terrine that I merely picked at as the initial round of toasts began. One by one, colleagues stood to praise Richard's business acumen, leadership, and legacy at TechSphere. They spoke of challenging quarters turned around, brilliant strategic decisions, and competitive threats neutralized. My father accepted each tribute with the practiced humility of someone who expected nothing less. When it was Richard's turn to speak, he rose slowly, surveying the table like a general addressing his troops. "When I joined TechSphere 25 years ago, few would have bet on our survival, let alone our dominance," he began, launching into a detailed account of his career triumphs. For 15 minutes he spoke about his vision, his perseverance, his achievements. He thanked the board members who had believed in him, the executives who had executed his strategies, and even the administrative staff who had supported his work. He praised Michael's entrepreneurial spirit and thanked my mother for being the wind beneath my wings. My name never left his lips. I stared at my barely touched entree, fighting the familiar sting of invisibility. Ethan's hand found mine under the table, squeezing gently in silent support. When Richard finally sat down to enthusiastic applause, I excused myself and headed to the restroom, needing a moment alone. In the elegant marble sanctuary, I gripped the edge of the sink and stared at my reflection. "You are not defined by his approval," I whispered to myself, repeating the mantra Dr. Caldwell had given me. "Your worth is not determined by his recognition." My phone buzzed with a text from my best friend Samantha. "How's it going? Survival level." I typed back Defcon 2. He thanked the catering staff by name but couldn't acknowledge his daughter's existence. Her response was immediate: "His loss, completely his loss. Want me to call with a fake emergency?" The offer made me smile despite everything. "Thanks, but I'm toughing it out. Ethan's being weirdly insistent that we stay." "Mysterious, keep me posted. You're amazing and I love you." Her simple affirmation steadied me. I replied my lipstick, squared my shoulders, and returned to the dining room with as much dignity as I could muster. As I approached our table, I noticed Ethan was no longer in his seat. I scanned the room and found him deep in conversation with James Westfield in a corner. Their discussion appeared intense, with Ethan showing James something on his phone and James nodding with increasing interest. When they noticed me watching, they quickly wrapped up their conversation and Ethan returned to his seat. "Everything okay?" I asked as I sat down. Ethan's smile was reassuring but tinged with that same mysterious anticipation I'd been noticing all week. "Everything's perfect," he said, "just getting to know your father's successor. Interesting guy." I wanted to ask more, but the dessert course was being served, and my father was tapping his glass for attention once again. Before we conclude this evening, Richard announced as servers cleared the dessert plates, "I'd like to invite family members to share some personal reflections." His gaze swept past me to land on my brother. "Michael, would you like to start?" Michael stood, champagne flute in hand, the golden liquid catching the light. "For those who might not know, I'm Richard's son, and I can tell you that the business genius you all respect is the same man at home, demanding excellence, accepting nothing less than the best, and always pushing us to achieve more." I fought the urge to roll my eyes. Michael's experience of our father had been so fundamentally different from mine that we might as well have grown up in separate households. "I remember when I was 16 and crashed the car Dad had just given me," Michael continued, chuckling. "Instead of yelling, he turned it into a lesson about responsibility and consequences. He made me work at his company's warehouse that summer to pay for the repairs. Taught me more about business and life than any class could." What Michael didn't mention was that when I had needed money for a school trip the same year, Richard had lectured me about financial planning and refused to help. Even though the trip was educational and would have looked good on my college applications, I had missed the opportunity. Dad, your guidance made me the man I am today, Michael concluded, raising his glass, to the best father and businessman I know. A chorus of hear hear rippled around the table as Michael sat down to approving nods. Diane, Richard prompted, turning to our mother, would you like to say a few words? My mother stood, her smile tight but convincing to anyone who didn't know her well. She spoke briefly about their 40 years of marriage, his dedication to his work, and her pride in his accomplishments. It was a perfectly appropriate speech from a supportive spouse, revealing nothing of the complex reality of their relationship. As she sat down, I felt a shift in the atmosphere. Richard's gaze finally turned to me, and a small challenging smile played at the corners of his mouth. Amber, we haven't heard from you yet. Surely my only daughter has something to share on this special occasion. The unexpected of being called on made my heart jump into my throat. All eyes turned to me, curious and expectant. I hadn't prepared anything, assuming based on a lifetime of experience that my father wouldn't want my input. Slowly I rose to my feet, willing my voice not to tremble. Dad, I began, searching for something genuine but appropriate to say. Your drive and determination have always been inspiring. I've learned from watching you that persistence is often the difference between success and failure. I paused, then decided to offer an olive branch, a small personal memory that had always meant something to me. I still remember when I was 9 and struggling with a difficult science project. You sat with me at the dining room table and showed me how to approach the problem systematically. That lesson in critical thinking has served me well throughout my career working with children who face challenges every day. It was one of the few positive memories I had of my father taking an interest in my education, a rare moment of connection that I had treasured. Before I could continue, Richard let out a short laugh that silenced the room. I think you're confusing me with your Uncle Frank, he said dismissively. I was in Hong Kong that entire month closing the Asiatech merger, one of my crowning achievements, actually. He turned to the executives at his end of the table, increased our market share by 22% overnight. Heat rushed to my face as several people chuckled. The memory one I had held close for decades disintegrated under his casual correction. Had I really misremembered something so significant, or was he rewriting history to maintain his narrative of disengagement from my life? I opened my mouth to respond, but Richard was already continuing. Though I'm not surprised Amber remembers it that way. Always had an active imagination, chose to work with children rather than pursue a real career in medicine or law, plays games and finger paints all day. Isn't that right, sweetheart? More laughter rippled around the table, louder this time. The gross mischaracterization of my work, which involved detailed neurological assessments, customized treatment plans, and close collaboration with physicians and educators, stung like a slap. Actually, I'm a pediatric occupational therapist specializing in neurological disorders, I said, my voice stronger now, fueled by indignation. I help children with serious disabilities develop the skills they need to. Yes, Richard interrupted with a dismissive wave. Very admirable. My point is Amber has always lived in a bit of a fantasy world, not the hard-nosed business sense you might expect from a Miller. He winked at James Westfield. Speaking of accomplished women, James, your wife Melissa just made partner at her law firm, didn't she? Now there's someone who understands professional ambition. The collective awkwardness in the room was palpable. Several guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. My mother stared fixedly at her water glass. Michael looked surprised by our father's overt dismissal, as if seeing this dynamic clearly for the first time. I remained standing, frozen in humiliation, unable to sit down but equally unable to formulate a response that won't make the situation worse. Tears threatened, but I refused to let them fall. I would not give him the satisfaction of seeing me cry. Beside me, Ethan slowly rose to his feet, his expression calm but his eyes blazing with a controlled anger I rarely saw. I'd like to offer a toast as well if I may, he said, his voice pleasant but carrying an undercurrent of steel. Richard looked momentarily taken aback. Son-in-laws were not typically part of the inner circle entitled to give speeches, but recovering quickly, he nodded with the magnanimous air of a king granting an audience to a peasant. Of course, Ethan, the floor is yours. Ethan gently guided me back to my seat with a reassuring squeeze of my shoulder, then raised his glass. Under the table, his other hand found mine and squeezed hard, a silent message passing between us. Trust me, it's time. Ethan stood tall, his posture relaxed but commanding. Unlike my father, he didn't need to dominate a room to hold its attention. His quiet confidence drew people in, made them lean forward to listen. First, I'd like to join everyone in acknowledging Richard's remarkable professional accomplishments, he began smoothly, Building TechSphere into an industry leader is no small feat, and the impact of your work will certainly outlast your tenure. My father nodded in acknowledgement, clearly pleased with this opening praise. A few colleagues murmured in agreement. What some of you may not know, Ethan continued, is that I've actually had the privilege of working with TechSphere myself over the past 6 months. I turned to stare at him in shock. This was the first I'd heard of any professional connection between my husband and my father's company. Richard's expression shifted from satisfaction to confusion. I wasn't aware of any consulting contracts with your firm, Ethan. Not with my primary company, Ethan clarified. I've been brought in as a specialized accessibility consultant through Access Tech Solutions. My side project focused on creating more inclusive digital environment. James Westfield nodded from his seat near my father. It was my initiative, Richard. After the Johnson lawsuit last year over our platform's ADA compliance issues, I thought it prudent to bring in an expert. My father's frown deepened. The Johnson lawsuit had been a public relations nightmare for TechSphere, with a class action suit alleging their flagship product discriminated against users with disabilities. The settlement had cost millions. What does this have to do with my retirement dinner? Richard asked, an edge creeping into his voice. Ethan smiled. I'm getting there. You see, when I was first approached about this consulting opportunity, I was particularly interested because of my wife's work. All eyes turned briefly to me, and I felt a flutter of anxiety, unsure where Ethan was going with this. Amber, as she tried to explain earlier, is a pediatric occupational therapist specializing in neurological disorders. Her work gives her unique insights into how people with different cognitive and physical abilities interact with technology. Her expertise has been invaluable to my work in designing accessible interfaces. My father shifted impatiently in his seat. This is fascinating, I'm sure, but... When I began examining TechSphere's systems, Ethan continued, smoothly talking over Richard's interruption, I discovered that the accessibility issues were deeply embedded in the core architecture. Traditional solutions would have required rebuilding from the ground up, costing tens of millions and delaying the next product launch by at least a year. The board members present looked alarmed at this assessment. Missed product launches and unexpected costs were exactly the kind of disruptions that tanked stock prices and ended careers. Fortunately, Ethan went on, I had been discussing a similar problem with Amber regarding one of her patients, a brilliant 12-year-old with severe motor limitations who wanted to use technology like his peers. The solution Amber developed for him involved creating adaptive pathways around the existing limitations rather than rebuilding the entire system. James leaned forward, picking up the thread. Ethan shared this approach with our development team, and we realized it could be applied to our platform. Instead of the complete overhaul our engineers had been planning, we implemented what we've been calling adaptive architecture throughout the system. The result, Ethan said, his voice gaining enthusiasm, was a solution that not only resolved the accessibility issues but actually improved performance for all users. Implementation took weeks instead of months, at a fraction of the projected cost. For the first time that evening, people were looking at me with genuine interest rather than polite indifference. I felt a strange mixture of pride and confusion, pride in the recognition of my work, confusion about why I was hearing this for the first time at my father's retirement dinner. The board was so impressed with the solution, James added, that they've approved a new accessibility initiative that will be implemented across all TechSphere products. We're projecting it will actually open up new market segments worth approximately $50 million annually. Richard looked stunned, his gaze darting between James, Ethan, and me. I wasn't briefed on any of this. Why wasn't I informed of such a significant development? James's expression was carefully neutral. The final proposal was submitted last week, Richard. I believe it was in the transition briefing packet. What you mentioned was too much detail, and that you trusted the team to handle it. A silver-haired board member supplied helpfully from down the table. Richard's face flushed slightly. I recognized the signs of his temper building and braced myself. But here's what makes this story particularly relevant tonight. Ethan continued smoothly, the solution that saved TechSphere millions and potentially opened up new markets worth tens of millions more. That solution came from Amber. Her insight, developed through years of working with disabled children, work that has been dismissed as finger painting and playing games, is what made this breakthrough possible. A murmur ran through the room as guests processed this information. My father's flush deepened, but before he could respond, Ethan pulled out his phone. In fact, I have an email here from CO Thomas Branson sent just last week. Ethan glanced at the screen. Please extend my personal thanks to Richard's daughter for her indirect contributions to this solution. Her unique perspective quite literally saved us millions and months of development time. Perhaps talent runs in the Miller family after all. Ethan looked up, his gaze locked with my father's. Thomas apparently didn't know Amber's name, he just knew her as Richard's daughter. Interesting that the CEO of the company knows you have a daughter who made a valuable contribution, while many of your colleagues seem surprised to learn you had a daughter at all. The implication hung in the air like smoke. Had my father deliberately kept me invisible even when my work had benefited his company? What's even more interesting, Ethan continued relentlessly, is that when the initial proposal for this solution was presented to the executive team, Richard actually took credit for inspiring it. He claimed it came from a conversation he had with the development team about thinking outside the box. All eyes turned to Richard, whose expression had transformed from confusion to barely controlled anger. "That's a serious accusation, Ethan," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "It's not an accusation, it's a fact," James interjected, looking uncomfortable but determined. "I was in that meeting, Richard. You specifically said the adaptive approach was something you'd been pushing for all along." Richard opened his mouth to respond, but the silver-haired board member spoke first. "Richard, did you knowingly take credit for an idea that came from your daughter via your son-in-law?" The question hung in the air. The festive atmosphere of the retirement dinner completely evaporated. Guests exchanged awkward glances, clearly wishing they were anywhere else. Richard's expression cycled through shock, anger, and finally settled on a practiced executive calm. "There appears to be some confusion about the development process. Ideas build on each other in a corporate environment. I may have helped shape the concept without realizing its origin." It was a masterful non-apology, neither confirming nor denying the accusation while creating plausible deniability. It was also, I knew with absolute certainty, a lie. My father never forgot where ideas came from, especially valuable ones. If he had claimed credit, it had been deliberate. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Not only had my father spent my entire life dismissing my achievements and abilities, but when my work actually proved valuable in his world, he had appropriated it without acknowledgement. The lifetime of emotional neglect suddenly seemed calculated rather than careless. As the uncomfortable silence stretched, I looked around the table. The expressions on the guests' faces had changed from awkward discomfort to something worse, pity. They were looking at me with pity and at my father with newly critical eyes. His carefully cultivated image as a business titan was being tarnished before their eyes, revealing the much less admirable man beneath. For the first time in my life, I felt no desire for my father's approval. What I felt instead was something approaching pity of my own, pity for a man so insecure that he couldn't acknowledge his own daughter's contributions, even when they benefited him directly. Ethan sat down beside me, taking my hand openly on top of the table now. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you," he whispered. "I wanted you to hear the acknowledgement publicly." I squeezed his hand in response, too overwhelmed to speak. Across the table, my mother was staring at Richard with an expression I had never seen before, a mixture of disappointment and resolve that suggested something fundamental had shifted in their relationship as well. My father, ever the corporate strategist, was already attempting damage control, forcing a laugh and saying, "Well, it seems my son-in-law has quite the flair for drama. Now shall we move on to—" "Actually," James interrupted, his voice firm, "I think we should acknowledge the contribution properly." He raised his glass to Amber Miller-Chen, whose innovative thinking saved our company millions and will help us better serve clients of all abilities. Tech sphere owes you a debt of gratitude. One by one, the executives and board members raised their glasses, echoing to Amber, the simple acknowledgement of my existence and contribution, something my father had never been able to give, brought unexpected tears to my eyes. Richard remained frozen, his face a mask of controlled fury as his carefully orchestrated evening of self-congratulation transformed into something entirely different. For several excruciating seconds my father sat motionless, his expression locked in that terrible grimace of barely contained rage. Then, with the practiced composure of an executive who had weathered many corporate storms, he attempted to regain control. "This is hardly the appropriate venue for such discussions," he said, his voice tightly controlled. "Whatever confusion exists about the origin of ideas can be addressed in a more private setting." Ethan's response was immediate and unyielding. "I disagree, Richard. After watching you publicly dismiss and belittle your daughter's career and contributions all evening, I think this is exactly the appropriate venue to set the record straight." Richard turned to James, clearly looking for an ally. "James, I'm surprised at your participation in this ambush, after all I've done for your career." But James, to my surprise, didn't back down. "With all due respect, sir, I've always admired your business acumen, but what happened in that meeting wasn't right. When I learned the solution had actually come from your daughter, the same daughter you never mentioned in all our years working together, I couldn't in good conscience stay silent." Richard's face darkened. "So this is the thanks I get for mentoring you, for hand-selecting you as my successor?" "You taught me that integrity matters in business," James replied quietly. "I'm trying to live up to that lesson." My father turned to Ethan, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "And you, I welcomed you into my family, and this is how you repay me, by attempting to humiliate me at my own retirement dinner?" Something snapped inside me. After 32 years of silence and acquiescence, of hoping for approval that never came, I found my voice. "Stop it," I said, the words coming out stronger than I expected. "Stop trying to make yourself the victim here." All eyes turned to me, including my father's, widening slightly in surprise at my intervention. "You welcomed Ethan into your family," I continued, incredulity making my voice rise. "You barely acknowledged his existence until you learned how successful his company was. And as for humiliation, do you have any idea what it feels like to be dismissed and belittled by your own father your entire life?" My hands were shaking, but I kept going, decades of pent-up hurt pouring out. "You missed my college graduation because a client meeting couldn't be rescheduled. You've never once visited my practice to see the work I do. When I received a state award for innovative therapy techniques last year, you didn't even respond to the invitation." Richard's expression was a mixture of shock and defensiveness. "I was motivating you to achieve more, to not be satisfied with mediocrity." "Mediocrity," I repeated, incredulous. "I graduated summa cum laude from Cornell. I've published research in leading journals. I've developed therapeutic approaches that are being adopted nationwide. But because I chose to help children instead of chase profit, you decided my career wasn't worthy of respect." "I wanted what was best for you," he insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. "No," I said firmly, "you wanted what was best for your ego, a daughter you could brag about to colleagues, like you do with Michael. But when I chose a path that didn't align with your narrow definition of success, you chose to make me invisible rather than trying to understand my world." Michael, who had been watching this exchange with increasing discomfort, finally spoke up. "Dad, is this true? Have you really been treating Amber this way all these years?" Richard turned to his son with an expression of betrayal. "Not you too, Michael. You know how I've always supported both my children." Michael shook his head slowly. "No, I'm realizing I don't know that at all. I've been so caught up in my own relationship with you that I never noticed what was happening with Amber." He looked at me, genuine regret in his eyes. "I'm sorry, sis, I should have seen it." "It's not your fault," I told him, meaning it. Michael had been as much a product of our father's manipulation as I had, just in a different way. My mother, who had remained silent throughout this exchange, finally stood up. Her normally placid expression was replaced by one of quiet determination. "Richard," she said, her voice soft but resolute, "I've spent 40 years making excuses for the way you treat our daughter. I've told myself it was just your way, that you didn't mean to hurt her, but seeing it all laid bare tonight, hearing how you took credit for her work." She shook her head. "I can't do it anymore." My father stared at her in disbelief. In all their years of marriage, I had never heard my mother directly challenge him. "Diane, you're overreacting," he began, but she cut him off with a raised hand. "No, Richard, for once I'm finally reacting appropriately." The silver-haired board member who had been watching the family drama unfold cleared his throat. "Richard, I've known you for 20 years. We've weathered many storms together professionally, but I must say, I'm disappointed. Professional achievements mean little if they come at the expense of personal integrity." My father's face flushed dark red. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I won't sit here and be lectured about integrity and family values. This dinner is over." Without another word, he threw his napkin on the table and stormed out of the private dining room, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. In the awkward aftermath, guests began to murmur among themselves, some making discreet exits while others lingered, unsure of the protocol in such an unprecedented situation. I sat frozen, a mixture of vindication and grief washing over me in alternating waves. The public confrontation I had both feared and secretly longed for had finally happened, but the victory felt hollow. James approached our end of the table, looking genuinely contrite. "Amber, I want to apologize. I had no idea about the family dynamics at play here. If I had known Richard was taking credit for work that originated with you, I would have spoken up sooner." "You couldn't have known," I assured him. "My father has always been skilled at presenting exactly the image he wants the world to see." "Still," James said, handing me a business card, I meant what I said about your contribution. If you're ever interested in consulting on accessibility issues, TechSphere would be lucky to have your direct input. The senior board member also approached, extending his hand. Mrs. Chen, despite the unfortunate end to the evening, I want you to know that your insights have made a significant impact. Sometimes the most valuable perspectives come from outside traditional corporate thinking. As more guests approached with similar sentiments, I experienced a strange reversal. Suddenly I was visible, acknowledged, even respected in my father's world. The irony that it came in his absence wasn't lost on me. My mother joined us, her expression a complex mixture of concern and relief. I should check on your father, she said, but made no move to leave. Are you okay, Mom? I asked, taking her hand. She gave me a sad smile. I should be asking you that question. I've failed you, Amber. I saw what was happening all these years and did nothing. You did what you could, I said, though we both knew it wasn't entirely true. Not anymore, she said with quiet determination. Things are going to change. I've spent too many years making excuses for his behavior. I think, she hesitated, then squared her shoulders. I think I need some time away from your father to figure out what I want the next chapter of my life to look like. The resolute tone in her voice surprised me. In all my childhood fantasies of confronting my father, I had never imagined my mother finding her voice as well. As the remaining guests dispersed, Ethan, Michael, Jessica, my mother and I found ourselves huddled together at the emptying table, processing the evening's dramatic turn. I had no idea, Michael said, shaking his head. I mean, I knew Dad was harder on you, but I never realized the extent of it. He showed us different sides of himself, I said. He needed you to admire him and me to seek his approval. Both kept him in control. Ethan put his arm around my shoulders. I'm sorry for not telling you about my work with TechSphere. I wanted the recognition to come without you having to ask for it. I understand why you did it, I said, leaning into him, but next time maybe give me a heads up before staging a corporate coup at a family dinner? His laugh broke some of the tension. Deal. We left the restaurant together, the aftermath of the confrontation still reverberating between us. In the parking lot, Ethan and I said goodbye to Michael and Jessica, with promises to meet soon for a proper conversation. My mother declined my offer to stay with us, saying she had already arranged to spend the night at her sister's house. I need to think clearly, she explained. That's not possible when I'm under the same roof as your father right now. As Ethan and I drove home, the adrenaline of the evening finally began to wear off, leaving me emotionally exhausted but strangely light, as if a burden I had carried for decades had been partially lifted. How are you really feeling? Ethan asked as we pulled into our driveway. I considered the question carefully, relieved, sad, angry, vindicated all at once. That sounds about right, he said, turning off the engine. Inside our home we kicked off our shoes and collapsed onto the couch, the formal attire of the evening at odds with our posture of complete exhaustion. How long have you been planning this? I asked, curious about the extent of Ethan's strategy. The consulting work with TechSphere was legitimate. It started 6 months ago when James reached out, but when I realized the solution had come from our discussions about your patient, I started keeping receipts. He ran a hand through his hair. I wasn't planning to reveal it all at the retirement dinner. But when your father started publicly humiliating you again, claiming credit for your work was the last straw. You're quite the mastermind when you want to be, I said, unable to keep the admiration from my voice. I just couldn't stand watching him diminish you anymore, Ethan said simply. You're too brilliant to remain in his shadow. As we sat in the quiet of our living room, I recognized that while the evening had brought a kind of catharsis, it had also opened new questions. What would my relationship with my father look like going forward? Was reconciliation even possible after such a public confrontation? And how would these revelations affect our family dynamics in the long term? But those were questions for tomorrow. Tonight, for the first time in my life, I had stood up to my father and spoken my truth. It wasn't a perfect victory, real life rarely provides those, but it was a beginning. 1 week after the retirement dinner debacle, I was still processing the seismic shifts in my family dynamics. My father had retreated into stony silence, not reaching out to me or, from what I gathered, to anyone else who had witnessed his public unmasking. My mother had extended her stay at my aunt's house, calling me daily with updates on her thinking process and gentle inquiries about my well-being. I was at my desk reviewing patient files when my phone buzzed with an unexpected name. Michael. Hey, Amber, he said when I answered, his usually confident voice subdued. Do you have time for coffee this week, just the two of us? We met the following day at a quiet cafe halfway between my practice and his office. Michael arrived first, securing a corner table away from other patrons. When I spotted him, I was struck by how different he looked, less like our father's polished mini-me, and more like a man grappling with uncomfortable realizations. "Thanks for coming," he said, standing to give me an awkward hug. "I've been doing a lot of thinking since the dinner." "Me too," I admitted, taking the seat across from him. After ordering, Michael stared into his coffee cup as if searching for the right words. "I owe you an apology," he finally said, looking up to meet my eyes. "I've been willfully oblivious to what was happening between you and Dad all these years." "You were caught in the same dynamic," I said, "just a different side of it." "Maybe, but that doesn't excuse it." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so reminiscent of our father that I had to suppress a wince. "The thing is, I always thought Dad was just tougher on you because he saw more potential in you. That's what he told me once, when I asked why he was so hard on you after that science fair in middle school." I remembered that science fair clearly. My project on neural pathways had won first place, and my father had critiqued my presentation materials all the way home. But looking back, Michael continued, "I can see he was creating a competition between us where I always had the advantage. He'd praise me for things that came easily, then criticize you for not being perfect at things that were much harder." His insight surprised me. Michael had always seemed content with his golden child status, never questioning the uneven treatment. "Do you remember when you graduated from Cornell?" he asked suddenly. "I called to congratulate you and you sounded so resigned when I told you Dad couldn't stop bragging about you to his golf buddies." I nodded, the memory vivid, because I knew it wasn't true. He hadn't even mentioned my graduation to his secretary, let alone his friends. "Exactly, I found that out years later and convinced myself I must have misunderstood." Michael shook his head. "I'm sorry, Amber. I should have been a better brother, a better witness to what was happening." As we talked, I realized Michael had been as manipulated by our father as I had been, just in ways that felt better in the moment but ultimately isolated him from authentic relationships. By the time we parted with plans to meet again soon, I felt a connection with my brother that had been missing our entire lives. 2 days later, my mother asked me to meet her for lunch. She looked different, subtly but unmistakably changed. She'd cut her hair into a stylish bob that framed her face beautifully, and her usual conservative outfit was replaced by a colorful blouse I'd never seen before. "I'm considering a separation from your father," she announced without preamble after our orders were taken. "Not necessarily divorce, at least not yet, but I need space to figure out who I am apart from being Richard Miller's wife." I nearly choked on my water. "Mom, wow, are you okay?" Her smile was sad but determined. "Not entirely. 40 years is a long time to be with someone, but watching what happened at the dinner, seeing so clearly how he's treated you all these years and realizing my own complicity in it." She reached for my hand across the table. "I should have protected you better." "You did what you could," I said, the same words I'd offered the night of the dinner, but this time with more understanding behind them. "No," she said firmly, "I did what was easiest. There's a difference." I told myself I was mediating, finding middle ground, but really I was just avoiding conflict. She straightened her shoulders. "I'm done with that now." As lunch progressed, my mother shared more of her plans: a lease on a small apartment, volunteer work at an art museum she'd always loved, even tentative thoughts about traveling. "Your father isn't a monster," she said toward the end of our meal. "He's a deeply insecure man who built his identity around professional success because that's what his father valued. But understanding him doesn't excuse how he's treated you, or me, or even Michael in his own way." Her insight echoed what I'd been discussing with Dr. Caldwell in our recent sessions, that understanding the roots of my father's behavior didn't obligate me to tolerate its effects. That afternoon I received an unexpected email from James Westfield. The subject line read simply "Opportunity." The message inside was brief but impactful. "Amber, after learning more about your work, our accessibility team would like to consult with you on our new adaptive interface. This would be a paid position separate from Ethan's involvement. Your perspective as both a healthcare professional and someone with insight into the challenges faced by users with disabilities would be invaluable. Please consider it." I read the email twice, a strange mixture of professional pride and emotional vindication washing over me. Here was recognition of my expertise from my father's company, the very validation he had always withheld. When I showed the email to Ethan that evening, his smile was both proud and unsurprised. "You should do it if you want to. Your insights are exactly what they need." "I think I will," I said, realizing I meant it, "but I'll keep my practice. My kids need me too." The following week brought the most unexpected development of all: a text from my father asking if he could visit my office, not our home, not a neutral restaurant, but my workplace. After consulting with Ethan and Dr. Caldwell, I agreed, setting a time when I would be between patient appointments. When my father arrived, he looked smaller somehow, his usually commanding presence diminished. His expression as he surveyed my bright, child-friendly therapy space was unreadable. "Your receptionist seems very efficient," he said awkwardly, clearly struggling with this unfamiliar territory. "Teresa's amazing," I agreed, not making it easier for him. "She has a gift for making anxious children feel comfortable." He nodded, then gestured to the various specialized equipment around the room. "This is all very professional." "It is," I said simply. "Would you like me to explain what some of it does?" To my surprise, he nodded. For the next 15 minutes, I walked him through my therapy room, explaining how each piece of equipment helped children with different challenges. He asked surprisingly insightful questions, and I found myself slipping into the same tone I used when educating parents about their children's therapy. "Your mother mentioned you're consulting with TechSphere now," he said finally, when we had completed the tour. "Yes," I confirmed, waiting for the criticism or attempt to take credit that would normally follow. Instead, he hesitated, then said, "They're lucky to have your perspective." The words were so unexpected that I momentarily lost my composure. Before I could respond, there was a knock at the door and Teresa poked her head in. "Sorry to interrupt, Dr. Chen, but Logan is here early for his appointment. He's having a rough day, and his mom wonders if you could see him now." "Of course," I said automatically. "Tell them I'll be right there." As Teresa withdrew, my father cleared his throat. "I should go. You have work to do." I nodded, but as he turned to leave, he paused. He struggled visibly with the words. "I haven't been the father you deserved. I'm not sure I know how to be that person, but I'd like to try, if you're willing." It wasn't exactly an apology, but from my father, it was unprecedented. I considered my response carefully. "I'm willing to try as well," I said finally, "but things need to be different. I won't accept the dismissal and criticism anymore." "Fair enough," he said, and for a moment I caught a glimpse of vulnerability behind his usual armor. "Maybe we could have dinner sometime, just the two of us." "I'd like that," I said, surprised to find I meant it. As I watched him leave, I didn't feel the rush of vindication I might have expected. Instead, I felt something more complex, a cautious hope mingled with the understanding that real change would require sustained effort on both our parts. 6 months later, our family gathered for dinner at my mother's new apartment. The dynamics had shifted dramatically. My mother, thriving in her newfound independence, had become more confident and outspoken. My father, while still struggling with his innate tendency to dominate conversations, was making visible efforts to listen more and dictate less. Michael and I had developed a genuine friendship, often consulting each other about how to navigate our evolving family relationships. My father and I had established a cautious new connection. Our solo dinners had become a monthly ritual, sometimes awkward, occasionally insightful, always a work in progress. He had even observed one of my therapy sessions with patient permission, afterward admitting he finally understood why I had chosen this path. "You're extraordinary with them," he had said, the first unqualified praise I could remember receiving from him. "They trust you." During dinner at my mother's, as the conversation flowed more easily than I could ever remember in our family, my phone buzzed with an email notification. Reading it quickly, I couldn't suppress a smile. "Good news," Ethan asked. "The best," I confirmed. "That research paper I submitted to the Journal of Pediatric Occupational Therapy was accepted. They're publishing it in next month's issue." "That's wonderful, honey," my mother exclaimed. "It's the one about your adaptive technology approach, right?" I nodded, unable to keep the pride from my voice as I explained the significance of the publication to the others. To my surprise, my father was the first to raise his glass. "To Amber," he said, his voice gruff but sincere, "whose work is changing lives." As everyone echoed the toast, I felt Ethan squeeze my hand under the table. We exchanged a look that acknowledged both how far we had come and how much work still lay ahead. 2 weeks later, I found myself standing at a podium accepting an industry award for my contributions to accessible technology, the direct result of my consulting work with TechSphere. As I looked out at the audience, I saw Ethan in the front row, beaming with pride. Beside him sat my mother, elegant and attentive, and to my genuine surprise, my father was there too, watching with an expression I had spent a lifetime hoping to see, unmistakable pride. As I delivered my acceptance speech, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. The path to healing with my father was neither simple nor complete. Some wounds were too deep to fully heal, some patterns too ingrained to entirely overcome. But we were trying, and that effort itself represented a victory I once thought impossible. The retirement dinner that had begun as yet another exercise in invisibility had instead become the catalyst for truth-telling that transformed our family, not magically or completely, but genuinely and with purpose. As I concluded my speech to enthusiastic applause, I understood that the most important validation had never been my father's to give. It had always existed in the work itself, in the children whose lives I helped improve, in the loving partnership I had built with Ethan, and in my own recognition of my worth. That retirement dinner wasn't the end of my relationship with my father, it was the beginning of an honest one. Have you ever had to confront a difficult truth in your family? Did it lead to healing or more pain? Share your experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about family dynamics, personal growth, and finding your own voice. Thank you for being part of this journey with me, and remember, sometimes the hardest conversations led to the most necessary healing.